Hi, in this video we're gonna implement signed URLs to upload and download files from AWS. We're gonna build this very simple app where we can select some files, they will be uploaded to S3 and we're gonna display them in a list, and then we can download them as well. We're also gonna make sure to keep the name that the file was uploaded with. Let's get started. We're gonna kick things off with creating a bucket. I'm using AWS CDK here, which honestly is an overkill for this example, but I want to keep as much in the code as possible. Let's give it a unique name, and we're gonna block all public access, making the bucket completely private. Because of that, we also have to configure CORS. I'm gonna allow for post requests from a local host port. This way we'll be able to send post requests from the browser straight into AWS. Now we can move on to creating a database. I'm gonna use Terso for this one. It's a SQLite database. To set up a DB client, we're gonna need a URL and an authentication token. Last but not least, we have to create a database table to store references to uploaded documents. Let's keep it simple and just store an ID, key, and name without any dates and whatnot. Okay. Now that we have the bucket and the database set up, we can actually start building the app. I'm using SvelteKit here, never actually used it before, but wanted to try something else. So I'm gonna create a very simple form and I want to run an upload action every time the form is submitted. And I actually want to submit the form every time the input changes. So I'm gonna bind the form element to a variable and then use it to request submit on every change. We also have to define the upload action. Let's just log the payload for now and see if it works. Okay, so it worked. I have all the files logged, but we don't actually want to send the files anywhere but AWS. It's supposed to go from user's computer to AWS server, direct train, no stops. So I'm gonna save the files in a variable and remove them from the form data. I'll put file names in their place instead. Again, I've never used Svelte before, so not sure if this is the right way to do it, but it works, so it's good enough for me. Let me know if there is a better way to do this. Now, because this is a custom handler, we need to return a callback function and run the update method to keep the functionality that Svelte Enhance is responsible for. Okay, it worked. We're not sending files anymore, so now we can start talking to AWS. We're gonna create a function that will ask AWS to create a pre-signed post request. Basically, AWS is gonna use the credentials that are configured for the environment, and it's gonna use those credentials to generate a pre-signed URL. We will then use that to upload the file from the browser. Back in the upload action, we can map over the file names and use that function to generate the pre-signed URLs for each of the files, and then return them to the client. AWS will give us a URL and a fields object and expects to receive those fields with the request as form data. So we're gonna create a form data object and append each of the entries. Last but not least, we're going to append the file as well. It's important to do it last, otherwise it's not going to work. We can now go back to the submit handler and use the helper function along with the pre-signed URLs we've generated to send files to AWS. Before we can test it, we actually have to deploy the bucket first. Okay, I have the bucket in my AWS console, so let's see if we can upload some files. Okay, it worked. I have 4 files in my bucket, so let's make sure we have a way of displaying them now. We're gonna create another function that will use the database client we created in the beginning to save a reference of the uploaded documents in the database. Let's also create an endpoint that we can call once we know that the files were successfully uploaded. It only makes sense to expect an array of files because we can upload many files at once. Since we have an endpoint, we can also create a function for calling it. We can then use that after we've successfully uploaded files to AWS. For this example, we're just gonna assume that all the uploads are successful, but you would probably want to handle it in some way and make sure that they were successfully uploaded. With that out of the way, we can test it again. Okay, I got 8 files in my bucket now, which is good. Let's see the database as well. Okay, now we can go ahead and display those documents. First, we gotta write another SQL, this time for getting a list of the saved documents. And then we will use that in Svelte load function for the root page. Now let's iterate over the documents and display their names. We've got files on the page now, so let's add a button for downloading the file. We're sending a GET request with documents ID, so let's create that endpoint now. We will use the ID from the query params to get the document from the database, and then use its key to generate a signed URL. Okay, so let's create those functions now. First, we'll just write a straightforward SQL for getting a document by ID. This time, generating the URL is a little bit different, as we have to first create the get object command and then use it for generating the URL. Similar to post URL though, we have to provide a bucket name and a key, and it's also going to expire after a minute. Now, back in the page file, we can get the signed URL from the API response, and we will create an anchor link with that signed URL. We will append it to the document and programmatically click it, which will download the file, and then we will immediately remove the element from the document so it never actually shows up on the page. Let's check it out. Okay, it kind of works, but the file name is a UUID string and it does not have an extension. So if I go to Finder and try to open it from there, I'm getting a text document. However, if I add a ping extension, it's gonna open up in preview again and show me the image. We can fix this by adding a content disposition header when generating the post URL, or we could also define a response content disposition prop in the getObject command. We're gonna keep the default behavior with the attachment, which means it'll be downloaded, and then set the file name property. Let's check it out again. Okay, it worked. So to sum up, we've created signed URLs for uploading files and then saved references to them in the database, which we then used for creating a list of documents on the page. We were also able to then download the files from a private bucket, again using signed URLs, and we've kept the name using the content disposition header when uploading. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching.